What is happening? It's Halsey with the Helicopter Podcast. And today is a helicopter podcast first. I'm having my first return guest, Forrest Krupin, joining the podcast today. But before we talk to Forrest, big shout out to the Vertical HeliCASTS platform and MHM Publishing for making this all possible. And of course, to all of our sponsors, we love you and we appreciate the support. Forrest, what's up, dude?
Not much. How's it going, Halsey?
It's going good, man. Good. I feel like I don't recognize you. Is something changed?
Yeah, I started riding a lot more mountain bikes and drinking less beer.
It looks like you look good, man.
So,
You popped on. I'm like, God, I thought I knew this guy, but maybe I don't.
yeah. Am I really the first return guest?
You are. You are the first person that I've had on twice, I think. Minus obviously we've done like some Vertical HeliCASTS collaborations with like John and Jason. But yeah, I think legit you are my first returning guest. Which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
It's funny because I was actually, I saw that picture of you and Lee the other day.
Yeah.
And I sent it to you like, hey, you're famous, but I didn't actually recognize you in the photo. I was like, man, that looks kind of like Forrest and it sounds like Forrest on the video. And then she said like on the caption, like, seeing Forrest. I'm like, okay, so that's Forrest. So whatever you're doing, man, you look good. Well, it's good to see you.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Do you recall what episode you and I first talked? Like what number you are?
I think it was like 12 or 13. It was the tail end of your first season. You just kind of like squeezed me in with this guy at the end, little baby pilot, North Dakota. I was super nervous. Why is anyone going to want to listen to my story? I think I was like 700 hours at that point or something, right? Like little baby.
Well, the funny part is so for the audience, if you haven't checked out my first interview with Forrest, it's somewhere before like episode 15, probably like you said, closer to 10, 11, or 12. And then I actually took like a long break. So you were like on the tail end. I was still living in Texas. I had my little janky studio at that time. So lots changed with the podcast, which is similar to you. Not only have you dropped a couple of LBs, but obviously your career has changed drastically. But I remember recording the podcast with you. I remember it very well. I remember talking to you. I remember the conversation. I remember you telling me like, I don't know if people are going to, take comfort in this. I think I get more feedback from your podcast than most of my other podcasts. More people message me saying that they heard your podcast and then felt inspired to change what they're doing and become helicopter pilots. So I honestly think that the conversation that you and I had 2.5 years ago, however long ago it was, I think it legit might have altered the course for some people. So thank you for that conversation.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. I know like I keep my Instagram's pretty open and I get messages from people, especially after I did your podcast. I did one with your buddy Dan as well. And I've done some other oddball podcasts since then. And every time I do one, I seem to get another outreach of people hitting me up on my Instagram like, hey, how do I do what you do? Or, hey, I'm in the ski industry like you were, and I want to pivot into helicopters. How do I get there? And I tend to refer them. I have dozens of people. I'm like, go listen to the helicopter podcast, go listen to Aloft with Dan, go all the, the other vertical HeliCASTS now that you're doing. And I send them there, but it's been kind of an eye opener as from when you and I first talked. I was a baby pilot, brand new in the industry. Amid COVID, I was very much relying on my mentors. Like, how do I even function? Terrified to go into airspace, everything you do with a baby pilot. And now to have that reversed and sit here, and now I have people reaching out to me, and it clicked to me last summer, especially. Now I'm someone's mentor. I'm like, oh shit, I don't know how to be a mentor. Pardon, sorry, I'll try not to swear on here. Oh crap!
Hey, bro, this is a family show.
I'm a blue collar pilot.
You're a blue collar utility guy, and actually, I don't have any utility experience. So now, you have much more experience in that sector of helicopter flying than I do. Does that make me less cool to you, or do you still think I'm cool?
No, I still think you're cool. You have a podcast. You live in an awesome area
Yes.
that I need to come visit and bring my mountain bike to.
Yes, you do.
Um,
Please do. My mountain bike has been great at collecting dust. I rode so hard early spring, and then I'm still exercising and I'm trying to be healthy, but I'm like doing other things.
mhm.
And I just like, I don't know, I haven't had like this desire to ride. I think a big part of it is I love riding with people.
Yeah.
And like when I lived in Texas, I rode like every day because I had a group. I had a core group of dudes that we loved riding. We loved where we rode. And like I don't have that here. So yes, you need to get up here to at least get my ass in gear.
I'll come ride. I got a schedule now so I could plan things.
That's man, what a luxury. But no, I think it's cool, man. I think I do think about that sometimes. I've been a lot of people's mentor. I've also been mentored by a lot of people, and so I'm always thankful for the mentors that guided me through my early stages of the career. And then, as you've seen, and especially now with the advent of say social media and Instagram and someone like yourself that's a little more active on social, you kind of become not just a mentor for your direct friends and people that you went to flight school with or whatnot, but now it's all these random people. I get hit up all the time, all these big questions. Hey, should I do this? Should I do that? It's like, I don't even know you, but I'm happy to mentor, but I always feel like I mentor these people and then they end up being super cool and they do these cool jobs. And then they look back at me like, oh, that guy's an idiot. So I'm glad that you think I'm cool still. I appreciate that.
Yeah, the mentorship thing is really interesting because I struggle. Like people will reach out to me and I've gotten a lot better at filtering it out because if someone just reaches out to me just looking for how do I do this the easy way? How do I do this the cheap way? I kind of I try not to ever blow anyone off. Like I will respond to anyone who messages me, but I've gotten a lot better at kind of the person who asks the right questions or, hey, I know what sacrifices do I have to make to get where I need to go. And I tend
Totally.
to put a little more time into those sorts of conversations. So if you are someone listening and you want to reach out to anyone as a mentor, I suggest kind of taking an approach of, hey, how do I change to get where I need to be? What do I need to do within myself or my career or save or cut out to be able to afford this? Whatever it is, wherever you're at, whether, maybe you're an EMS pilot and you want to go utility. You're like, what do I do to get to utility? Well, suck up your pride, go to Alaska, fly an R-44. It's not the EC-130 you're in, the 145, whatever you're used to. But if you really want to get into utility, that's the fastest way to do it, right? And
100%. We talk on the show a lot about this idea of networking and keeping your friends close, maybe even keeping your enemies closer, right? But we don't really actually talk deep dive into it. I'm curious for you because I think honestly you have like, I feel like you've had gasoline, and maybe it's just because like I'm on the outside, I'm not living your life. So maybe it seemed like it's taken you forever to get from A to now what you're doing. From my outside perspective, I'm like, God dang, this guy's moving quick. Like he's pouring gasoline on his trajectory and it's caught fire and he's just going. How much of that was through your mentorship, your networking? What is how did you kind of navigate it to move so quickly like you have?
so a lot of it, I was very fortunate. I felt like I had a career and my own business prior to ever getting into aviation. So not saying that these guys and gals coming out of flight school at 20 and 22 aren't mature, but they haven't necessarily lived as much life. So I was very fortunate that when I chose to go to flight school, the first time around I couldn't afford it, and then I chose to build a business and sell my business within 2 or 3 years to then fund school. So when I went to school, I was able to focus strictly on school, and I didn't have to work. I didn't have to serve pizza on the side, anything like that. So that was a springboard. But then I had this background of having already ran my own business. I'd already worked in construction. So that was a little bit of a leg up. just knowing how to talk to people and network and build my network. And then my network from spider excavators, which we talked about on the first episode. I won't dive too far into it, but I worked with a lot of construction companies and I was around helicopters a fair bit. So I leaned on that a little bit and I was able to meet some of my now mentors that kind of none of them really gave me the silver spoon or golden ticket, but they always gave me some really good advice. Like some of the advice I got from one of my mentors was never say no to an opportunity. That didn't matter if, like when I went and flew ag for a season, and I got that job in ag because I had a CDL and a hazmat endorsement, not because I was a pilot. And I showed up.
Yeah.
I showed up to that job, and he hired me as a truck driver. But I showed up. I was a commercial pilot. I had 700-ish hours. And he's like, hey, I'm going to teach you how to start a 206. I'm going to get you a little bit of turbine time, but you're mostly going to be a truck driver. So what did I do on my couple of days off I had? I went and got all of my aerial application certificates for Oregon and Washington, where the company worked. I got reciprocity everywhere I could. And in June, he had 2 or 3 pilots just say, hey, I'm done for whatever reason. And he looked at me and said, well, you're up. You have your certificates. You already work for me. I've gotten you, 10, 15 hours sparing. I'm going to put a couple hours into you and I'm going to send you to the easy jobs where a lot of times the bigger jobs that he did, he had 2 helicopters on it. So he'd send me with a really experienced guy and I'd be flying a second helicopter and that's how I did it. But I focused only on work. I didn't have much of a social life. When I first started my career, I was in a relationship. I was not married, but I kind of make the age joke, right? I wound up single right around the same time you and I started talking.
Yep, that happens.
So then I just
focused. If you're unfamiliar with Forrest reference, they're AIDS, aviation-induced divorce syndrome.
Yeah. So after that, I just decided I was going to work on myself and I was going to focus on my career. And I didn't say no to any opportunities. My whole goal was to go to Alaska. So, the tail end of that summer spraying for a time frame for folks, that was the tail end of 21. I started sending out applications. I redid my resume, and the director of operations for Alpine called me, and he's like, hey, so I'm going to actually be in Washington. I see your resume says Washington. I'll be in the Seattle area. I'd like to get breakfast and meet you tomorrow morning. I'm like, okay, I'll be there. I lived 7 hours from Seattle. I didn't tell him that.
Yeah.
I just got,
of course.
I got my ratty old Toyota Tundra and I drove to Seattle, and I got to Seattle at 3:00 in the morning, took a nap in the back seat and met this guy from Alaska for breakfast. And I didn't let him know that I wasn't close. I didn't let him know that it was inconvenient. And even in that interview, he looked at me and he said, so I don't know who you're going to fly for. It might be us. It might be someone else, but you will get a job with someone. So I suggest you get to Alaska. I said, okay. So I finished up the ag spraying and I got a job in Alaska running a snowcat. Like I fell back on my previous life experience. I didn't move to Alaska with a flying job. I moved to Alaska with a job to run a snowcat for LES the resort. So that was, again, kind of going back on falling back on a past.
Can I tangent on that for a second?
Yeah.
So I did ski. I'm doing ski patrol now, and
the difference between.
I love skiing.
I got a ski patrol joke for you, Halsey.
Okay, let's hear it.
All right, the difference between God and ski patrol.
God won't tell you that he's on ski patrol.
God doesn't think he's ski patrol. Sorry, go back to your tangent.
I take offense to that, Forrest. Okay, I am a public servant. Okay, and no, I'm kidding. I totally get the joke and see where it comes from. I'm on the volunteer side, which actually one would argue is sometimes even that personality a little bit more, actually. But anyway, I love skiing. I love the mountain. And I was up close and personal with some snowcats this year in the shop, not like as it's operating. They don't, at least where we're at the hill that I'm at, they don't operate snowcats when the public's on. Mm-hmm. their snowcats are gone by that time they do all their stuff overnight. Is it fun to drive a snowcat?
It is. And I've been in the ski industry and a snowcat in some way, shape, or form since 2010. So if I had the experience I'd have in snowcats and helicopters, I could probably fly anything and do anything for anyone. But it keeps sucking you back. And
Yeah.
they are fun. I am getting to a little bit of that crusty, I'm done, been there, done that. But I mean, even this last winter, I was running the snowcat for Deer Valley out in Utah because I had to work while I was figuring out where I was going to go fly.
Yeah, it's always kind of nice to at least have something to kind of support you while you're kind of in the middle of whatever the next thing is. How much is like a snowcat translate in? And I'm guessing we probably talked about this on our first podcast, so this might be a little bit of a repeat, but obviously you've worked around and in heavy machinery. Did that help with like learning how to fly helicopters, having that background and being able to drive those machines?
We know you love helicopters. That's why you're here. But are you ready to make it a career? Hillsboro Heli Academy has been making dreams of flying helicopters come true since 1980. Visit us at flyhaa.com and dream big.
I think so. I've had a couple of my instructors so I'm not an instructor, so I can't speak to that side about like teaching someone who's an equipment operator how to fly versus someone who's not. For me, I'm just a mechanical guy. So when it came to systems and engines and how everything worked, that helped. But yeah, I think some are the hand-eye coordination, perhaps, definitely. You run a snowcat with your butt, kind of how you fly with your butt.
Sure.
So I think some of it helped. Kind of the joke I like to make because I've never had a job where they didn't pay me to stare out a window. And my 8th grade English teacher told me, I was that kid in the back daydreaming, looking out the window. And she's like, no one's ever going to pay you to look out a window. I'm like, watch this.
Watch me now.
But yeah.
What's harder, snowcat or helicopter?
Oh, they're different. I have scared myself just as bad in a snowcat as I ever have in a helicopter. I think so. We talked about spider excavators on the first episode real briefly. They got legs and tires instead of tracks, and you could have the cab level on a 1-to-1 slope. And I could send you a picture you could attach to this when you post it. I have scared myself far worse in one of those than I ever have in a helicopter.
Oh, I'm sure.
But it's a different beast. It doesn't compare. It's just really fun and cool.
Yeah. Fun, different, and not necessarily comparable, but kind of cool. And I think that, I don't know. I'm guessing that there's something that translates from that experience to flying helicopters. I felt as an instructor that my younger students, guys and gals that had like me growing up playing video games and like were used to a controller and things like that, did better learning how to fly the helicopter initially than say like an older person that wasn't really in a generation of say video games, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I always kind of felt that was interesting. Or like one time I operated a crane as like a 12-year-old in New York, a big crane. My dad's buddy was a crane operator and I killed it. I was like 12 and I was like killing it. Mm-hmm. Then my dad gets in, he totally screws everything up. He's wrapping the lines. I mean, so I think it's like I just had that experience because I was a bit of a gamer growing up. So, I don't know. A couple of things I also want to talk about that you've mentioned, and then I want to hear back to your story is, I think people can look at like you and say, oh God, he wasn't a CFI. He got lucky by, getting flight time in this ag and turbine time early on, this and that. To me, I don't think it was luck at all. It seems like you put yourself in a position to receive that luck, right? Like you went and got an ag job as a driver and you sucked up your pride. You drove the truck and you said, hey, maybe I should prepare myself just in case. So let me go and get my aerial application certification for, X, Y, and Z here. And then boom, at some point you're called to the majors and you're ready to go. You're ready to play. And I don't think that's lucky at all. I think that's just being prepared. And so I think oftentimes people get confused, like, oh, it's lucky that worked out for Forrest. And it's like, yeah, maybe there's a little luck, but it's lucky that those people chose to leave for whatever reason. But if you weren't in a position to receive that luck, then you wouldn't have been able to capitalize on it. And I do think as an older person, getting into, how old were you when you started flying helicopters?
Oh, now I got to do math, Halsey. 27 or 28.
Yeah. So like old person compared, again, I started when I was like 18, right? So I think there is a big difference. I think especially with guys, I can only, relate to being a dude. So it seems like for me, my maturity level from age 18 to age 19 to 20, I mean, exponentially every year, I got more mature. And I think what comes with that maturity is like this understanding that like, hey, life is not always just about having fun and self-serving and going out and partying and trying to get with this girl and that girl and do this and do that. Like my work was not my priority, which was funny. I worked so hard to get a job as a CFI and I was so excited, but yet I prioritized everything other than actually that job. 100%. And now I look back, I'm like, God, I was such an idiot. Like what an asshole. Like I remember I would complaining that, I had a Saturday morning 7 a.m. block because that effed up my drinking. Like how am I supposed to go and party with my friends if I'm supposed to fly a helicopter at 7 a.m., And I think part of that is, maybe just me as a person, but I think it's a lot of 19, 20-year-olds, as a young person. So I definitely think like if you're younger and you're listening to this podcast and you're hearing Forrest's story or my story or anyone's story, like there's a common theme, and the common theme is like when you're growing up, you do growing up things. And when you do growing up things, good things happen. And so I do like to point that out, that you obviously did all the right things to put yourself in a position for success. And, I think that that's highlighted by, again, how quickly you've gone from A to B. So I think that's super cool. You go up to Alaska, once again, not flying a helicopter, you're driving a snowcat. What happens next?
Yeah, so not to tangent back where you went, but yeah, a quote that one of my mentors gave me is, luck is the residue of preparation. And that stuck with me since day one. So that's one thing that kind of gets me when people reach out. They're like, oh, you're so lucky you got here. I'm like, no, I only post the good stuff on Instagram. That's the other thing I tell people.
You don't see me crying in my pillow at night. Exactly. I get the same thing all the time, whether it's the success of the podcast or my sales business, which has done pretty well. No one sees the actual down and dirty of that. No. And I actually, for the longest time, just considered myself lucky. I really did. I was like, how did I sell this helicopter? Man, lucky. How did I do that? And then I had an executive coach, and he's like, no, you were prepared to receive that luck. Change your perspective. Because I don't think, I just think that that's truly luck, is like you're just ready to receive good fortune. Mm-hmm. And if you're not ready to receive it, then you won't. And so, yeah, I love that, what your mentor said. And I think we just live in a society where, and especially on Instagram, like you said, you're only posting the fun stuff, right? Yeah. So it's like, of course, people can get this perception of reality, or what's the, I guess, word, the truth, is not necessarily always what we're seeing on Instagram, but, I get it. And kudos to you for being positioned to receive luck, to have that residue in your fortune.
Thanks. So yeah, Alaska, I went up there in the fall of 21, and I didn't know who I was going to fly for. I had that magical 1,000 hours that everyone's looking for. One thing I had in my pocket is I had just spent a whole summer flying turbines, spraying, so I wasn't necessarily itching for turbine time. What I really wanted was long line time. So I interviewed, like everyone does, with all the tour operators, and I did not want to fly tours. So I had managed to go this alternative route through, oil field surveys and ag. And I'm like, I'm not going to fall victim to flying tours of 1,000 hours.
I know you're so alternative.
Yeah, I just didn't think I had the mindset for it.
You're so against the grain. That's funny to me because I think your personality is, you're so It seems like you're a guy that likes social interaction. I think you would have dug tours.
I wound up flying tours.
Okay.
Yeah, so I went to work for Alpine. I decided instead of going to fly an A-Star, or I didn't think I needed the turbine time. Like I had some in my logbook and I was like, okay, I get how it works, but I was more focused on getting long line time. So I chose to go fly for a tour operator with 44s, but they had a dog camp. So part of my deal with them was, so they had a specific contract that didn't wind up going through down in Seward. But I kind of got it in my deal, advocated for myself that I was going to get to learn to fly a long line after I did my 135, in basic indoc. So I got a little bit of long line time with them. And I wound up flying tours for the whole summer. And looking back on it now, I didn't go to work every day with the best attitude towards flying tours. I was sometimes kind of the grumpy old guy because a lot of those.
I was going to say, you salty old dog.
Some days I was. But I met some of my absolute best friends to this day flying that summer out of Girdwood. I met some of my best friends. I had great networking opportunities. I got to learn to fly a line, and the freedom that we had in those tours. We got a block of time, depending on what length the tour was, and you went and created your own tour. Yes, they wanted you to land on a certain glacier if you could get there for weather, and yes, you were supposed to show them a certain part of the Prince William Sound. But at the end of the day, as long as your guests came back super stoked, they didn't care where or how you did it. So looking back now,
that's cool.
I wish I would have had a slightly better attitude towards the tours, but I wanted flying tours, got a little bit of long line. Then the end of that summer, that started winding.
And what I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think there's a lesson there too, right? Like I've talked about this on the show many times. Where you're at is usually where you're most miserable. It seems like, you're instructing. I'm sick of instructing. I'm giving tours. Man, if I have to give another Grand Canyon tour, I'm going to blow my brains out. It's like, it seems like it's easy to be miserable in that situation, but then you look back and you say, oh, actually that was pretty good. Right. Or for instructors, it's like, it's the one job where you go and take a helicopter and do whatever you want, really, like that doesn't happen. You get to go into autos and this and that. Like, I think it's pretty cool, but I wanted nothing to do with it once I got my time. Right. And now I look back, I'm like, man, if that paid well, I'd do it today. Like that was fun. So I think it's easy to like kind of be in the doldrum, but I think we owe it to ourselves to try to better our experience by having the best attitude.
You have to find a way to enjoy the ride. Like,
what's the point, right? Otherwise.
And I found in the early stages of my career, I was so focused on getting to utility, getting to bigger helicopters, getting to that career job. Like I didn't always allow myself the time to sit there and sit back and look around and be like, okay, I'm flying tours, but these folks I'm flying, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for them. So I just need to enjoy it with them. I flew some of the coolest people on tours, from folks from way down south who never have seen snow, and now we're standing on a glacier. Or I had, these random oddballs that wanted to jump in the glacier, or just so much cool stuff. And looking back, I'm like,
that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, cold plunge in the glacier.
Jump in the glacier.
Well, if you would go to Alaska,
I plunge every day, bro. I'm a daily plunger.
Or go do it on a glacier.
I want to. I actually thought about that recently. It's probably very cold.
It is.
It's probably colder than I'm used to.
I
did 34.5 degrees recently up here in Central Oregon. I found a near glacier runoff, and it was like, that's really cold compared to like my 50 to 55 that I'm typically in the Deschutes here.
Yeah. So yeah, tours. And then what did I do after tours? I went and did some contract work doing LIDAR. And that was kind of my first taste of traveling cross country to go meet a helicopter.
Real fast with you starting in Alaska. One thing that I don't know anything about Alaska, to be honest. I've never been to Alaska. I've never obviously then flown helicopters in Alaska. The kind of the common denominator that I hear from a lot of my friends that went the route of Temsco or Coastal or whatever it may be, flying their first turbine gig in Alaska at tours, is that Alaska, even with the most mundane job, is still gnarly, specifically like regarding weather and visibility and ceiling. Was that your experience as well? And what did you do to keep yourself safe, as still at that time, I'm calling you a baby pilot?
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com.
Yeah, absolutely. So Alaska is the most amazing and most terrifying place to fly. And Alaska will try and kill you every time you turn around, whether that's a giant brown bear or the weather or flat light. And even in tours, that's one thing I didn't realize how much I learned until I got out of the tours, was all these skills about flying in big mountains with real weather. Alaska VFR, we've all heard that saying, is a very real thing. And as a new pilot, a lot of times, even with the best operators, there's always going to be that external pressure, or the guy next to you is going to go and you're going to be thinking, is this a good idea to go to dog camp? So learning how to say no, I learned how to say no in Alaska. It took a while. I've been in some situations where I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to sit on this mountaintop now until the cloud leaves, or I'm going to land on that sandbar in the river and wait it out. And that's really what you learn, even in tours up there.
Yeah, it's no joke. I just talked to a friend recently. I mean, he was in a situation in Alaska that, everything. It's one of those situations where like you plan, everything's perfect. You even see where you're about to land, and then boom, things change.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, and that's just not an experience that I ever had, ever got, And so even at Maverick, there would be like these random days in Vegas. They didn't happen often, which was part of the problem. So when they did happen, it was crazy, where it was like low clouds and weird visibility, right? And 50% of the guys that worked at Maverick were like former Alaska guys. For them it was, non-issue, like bing bada boom, this is easy, compared to Alaska. Whereas me, I was like, this is scary. I'm not used to this, right? And so I do think that Alaska sounds amazing. It seems like a scary place for a new pilot. And it's funny because so much of the entry-level stuff there is new guys. So, I'm glad that you got to go up there and experience that. I'm glad that you were safe. And I'm sure you look back at that experience and see that that's probably a time where you learned more than you thought you did.
There were days I learned more than I bargained for too.
100%.
And because a lot of times, I mean, you talk about, we always fly with an out, right? You're doing an off airport, especially at Pinnacle or wherever you're going, you always fly with an out. And in Alaska, yes, you fly with an out. A lot of times it's, you're thinking about your power and your wind and all that. And then all of a sudden a cloud could come in and your out is no longer viable. And now you're committed to your LZ because your out is IFC.
Yeah.
And that is
that
fast. It's just instant. And you try to not put yourself in that position, but sometimes it is just that fast. You turn around and it's there. A lot of times you're on these jobs and you might be, this is kind of getting into more what I did last summer when I wasn't flying tours, but you'd be, on these LZs, whether you're working on a repeater tower or you're flying geologists around looking for rocks. And as a pilot, a lot of times you'll double as a bear guard and the weatherman, because you're hanging out. You don't get to just crawl in the back of that helicopter and take a nap, because you got to be paying attention.
Sure.
Because if something starts rolling in and you don't, herd your cats back into the helicopter, you're spending the night there. So
yeah, that's a place where you don't want to sleep.
No.
What is the bear situation?
Depends on where you're at in Alaska, but they're everywhere. And once you get up there, you are part of the food chain. You're no longer the top of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm guessing like hiding in your R-44 doesn't do you good.
No, you could Google photos of bears versus aircraft in Alaska. Um, just one
Never.
swipe, they're done. People think bears. You also got to worry about the moose who wants to come rub his antlers on your tail boom. Well, now that aircraft's not flying anywhere. So the things are huge.
Yeah. Not to mention, like, they're pretty dangerous too, right?
Yeah, I'd be more worried about a moose than most bears. The bears, you could usually be like, oh, go away, bear, and make noise, and they run off. The moose look at you like, yeah, well, that's neat. I'm going to kick you.
I'm going to go kill you.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, Alaska's no joke. It's one of those places where it truly is like the last great frontier. And flying it has to be, it's so much of the culture there. I mean, everyone flies, right? I mean, people have airplanes and bush planes and, it's part of that DNA up there, but that's like a DNA, right? It's like if you're an outsider going into that, you don't necessarily have that experience just to be okay flying in that environment. So if you're listening to the podcast and you're hoping that one of your first, early on gigs is up in Alaska, go for it. But know that is a bit of a tall order, and to prepare yourself to make decisions, prepare yourself to say the ultimate, hardest word in our business, which is no. I'm not going to go today. The other guys are going. That's great. I'm not going to go.
Yeah, good for them.
But man, that's a hard word when you're a little baby pilot. So I think it's cool that you did that. So you're flying LIDAR. What were you flying LIDAR in? What kind of machine?
Jet Ranger.
Nice.
Kind of a little bit in a Long Ranger. And that was just kind of a contract thing to get some hours during the shoulder season while I was trying to get on with I was trying to go to a bigger utility operator in Alaska and kind of separate myself from 44s finally. So I wound up going to Maritime because I wound up with a bunch of bell time and Jet Rangers and Long Rangers. So it was a pretty easy shoe-in to go over there. And they put me right into the 407. I started with them in November, a year and a half ago or so.
What did you do? And I'm familiar with Maritime to a point. Obviously, utility operator up in Alaska. I've had a couple of buddies go through there. I think there was an accident there at some point recently. What their primary mission, all utility? That's what you're doing?
Yeah, so they do all utility. They do very, very, very little charter work. I think I flew one tour at a Homer for them. When I was there, there's a little glacier they go land on across the spit, and it's kind of fun. It was like a wedding shoot, and it was like, oh, I got back to my roots and I flew a tour. That's the funnest tour I ever flew because it wasn't my everyday job, and I just got to put my tour hat
what
back
you're doing
on
all the time.
But yeah, we did a lot of utility I got really lucky. They moved me around a lot. So I would fly. We supported a couple oil rigs in the Cook Inlet up there. So you're flying offshore, but you're not miles and miles and miles offshore. But now you're over open water in Alaska dealing with weather. So that's always interesting and a little, L3 on floats. And like, I'm so hosed because these floats are doing no good.
I'm going to flip right over.
And then I'm going to freeze. I got like 3 minutes.
Do you not wear like a suit for that?
No.
Should you?
We should. And they have them, but a lot of times it's not a requirement depending on the project you're flying. So
I would be that guy. Like all the other pilots are going out in their shorts and their flannel, and I come out with my helmet on, my full safety gear. I'm terrified of water.
Well, you never wear shorts in Alaska. I mean, the mosquitoes would eat you alive.
That's true. You got jeans on at least.
But for them, I got to fly. I was all up over the North Slope, the Arctic Circle, Barrow. Well, it's called Utqiagvik now, but everyone knows it as Barrow.
Sure.
It's the farthest north village in North America.
What's that village like?
That Barrow is an experience. So I have been there both in the wintertime running snow. So we were talking about snowcats. Even the winters in Alaska, I still ran snowcats. So there's this whole tangent for a second. The CWAT trail, the Community Winter Access Trail. And we took piston bully 600 snowcats that were converted to the back compartment, like a people mover you'd see at a resort, Had a
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
bunk in it, and we'd go out on trail for 12, 14 days at a time, and we'd tow.
Really?
Yeah, we'd tow a skid with us with a ton of fuel. And we'd go build this trail that they'd haul freight and cargo, and people drive vehicles in over the winter. So I did that. Even so, when I was at Maritime, I had a month on, month off schedule in the winter. So I went up there for a month for fiscal reasons, and it was just a cool adventure.
I was gonna say, it sounds like that would be a total blast.
It had its moments. It was mostly fiscal. By day 14 without a shower and a snowcat by yourself, you're really done with yourself.
I guess so. Yeah, it makes sense.
But yeah, so Barrow in the winter just looks just like it does if you watch TV on like Life Below Zero, right? It's just frozen Arctic, no trees, everyone's bundled up, 40, 50 below ambient before the wind chill. And it's just a terribly cold and very dark place because we're up there in, January, February, and you're getting 45 minutes of daylight.
That's crazy. I can imagine driving a snowcat, you could get pretty sleepy too, especially if it's like always dark.
Yeah, a lot of caffeine.
Did you fall asleep at the wheel, Forrest?
I may have woke up to my coworkers yelling at me on the radio once, but there's nothing to hit. You're just going over the tundra. It just gets bumpier.
Yeah, you're just going. That's funny. I would definitely, man, I have a hard time when I'm tired, especially if it's dark. I feel like the second the lights go off, sun goes down, room's dark, I'm asleep. Second lights come on, I'm awake. Like it's my body's very, I guess, normally synced with like day and night circumstances or expectations. What are the people like in Barrow? Like the locals, like a true local.
The true locals up there are amazing, super nice people, because anytime you're up there working, what I've found, especially going back in the summertime, in the wintertime, they're super excited you're there because you're attaching them to civilization with a road for 6 weeks. In the summertime, you're in a helicopter. So all the kids come out and they're standing on the fence when you land in front of the flight service station. Right on the main road, they're all, out there waving at you. They want to say hi, give you high fives, give you stickers. So everyone in the town is generally very excited that you're there because you're doing something to benefit their village and their way of life in their town that they work so hard to protect and continue to live. A lot of times I've had elders in some of the even smaller villages, they'll bring, native food, and it's considered rude not to try it. So I've tried some really funky, weird stuff.
Some whale blubber?
Yep.
Some fermented whale blubber?
Yeah.
Muck tuck.
Makes your eyes sparkle.
Yeah, is it pretty bad?
It's terrible. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know.
What do you compare it to?
Have you ever had gefilte fish?
No, very gefilte fish. I mean, I am married to a Jewish woman, so it's possible, but no, I've actually never had gefilte fish.
Yeah, it's just awful.
Yeah, so fun fact is I don't eat anything from the ocean, so it would be extra awful for me. I mean, you can give me the most mild crab or halibut, and I'm still just disgusted, outwardly, physically sick about it. So muck tuck, any of that, ugh. I would be like that guy that's like, hey, look, I know this is rude, but I have an allergy to muck tuck. Okay, I can't eat it. I break out. It's horrible.
But yeah, so I flew up there. That was super cool. It was to the point, one of the hotels we walked into to stay, the guy actually recognized me from the winter, so that was pretty welcoming.
Nice.
I'm here way too much.
Yeah, people in Barrow know me, and that's not good.
Yeah, pretty much. Dead Horse is a little different because Dead Horse, no one actually lives there. It's just an oil field, just man camp after man camp after man camp.
How much of the daily operation is external load?
A fair bit. I got pretty lucky with the contracts I got sent on last summer. So I was able to pick up, about 100 hours a long line. Little less than that, but I got put on a drill support contract with another more experienced pilot. Got to learn a lot from him. That project at a Barrow, we slung a bunch of welding equipment out for them to work on the pipeline. Their little local pipeline, not the Alaska pipeline, because there's a road to pretty much all that. I was on this Ambler Road project for a little while. We were slinging raft around like a little jet boat for these guys to go survey the bottom of the river.
That's cool.
So not a ton. Most of the slinging, a lot of the slinging, I should say, was actually in the inlet, because that's how they move a lot of the cargo out to the oil rigs in the winter.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it makes sense, I guess. What, learning external load, what did that look like for you? What was hard about it? What was struggled? What were some of the moments that like, oh man, I wish I knew that now, or then what I know now to be a better longline pilot?
This podcast is brought to you by HeliCASTS. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. HeliCASTS handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter is sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at HeliCASTS today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-HeliCASTS, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@helicopter.com. HeliCASTS. List it, sell it, done.
It's like learning to fly again. It's like learning to hover again, really. And when I learned, I had an amazing instructor, the chief at Alpine. He taught me, and you literally go back to flight school. He had his little toy Robbie with a string attached to it, and he starts talking about the different factors and what makes it move and the sway, and they basically get you to a point where they feel they're not going to go, you're not going to go crater yourself. And then they send you on easy jobs, and it starts with, can you hit a beach with a raft? And then it moves to, one of the first things I ever slung was actually the honey buckets off the glacier. All the dog waste.
That's a shitty job. Family show.
So just learning what to use as references, because if you stare at the load, you're moving, load's moving, it's never going to stop moving. And then just figuring out to just glance at your load and keep your references further out. And it's one of those things. Everyone I know, I guess I'm surrounded with guys and gals who are either in utility or want to be in utility, or some version thereof. It's one of those things. Everyone wants to do it, but you have to find someone to teach you how to do it. But it only takes a couple of hours for someone to teach you how to sort of do it, and then you got to go figure it out.
Yeah, it's kind of like the best training for it is on the job training.
Yeah,
I have very little external load experience. I did when I was working at Hillsborough back in the day, I got to do a course with the intention of like teaching it, and then I ended up moving, so it kind of derailed that. So I only got like 5 or 10 hours, but. The funny part was my boss at that, Marcus, who's an awesome dude. I liked him a lot. He came from the industry, so he had Alaska experience. I mean, he wasn't like your typical flight school chief. Like the guy had 10, 12 years of industry experience doing cool stuff. And so he's like the right person, but he's a German dude, like screaming at you the whole time, and it's hard. So finally he's like, I'm just going to get out of the helicopter. Just try to go figure this out. Of course, like the second he got out, then I'm like, oh, okay, this is fine now. I can do this now, But yeah, it's really tricky. It's been years. We're talking 10 plus years for me, in doing that. But I do recall like yesterday, like, oh my God, like, here was a guy that was teaching full downs for 3 years straight. Felt pretty good about flying the Robinson at that time. Felt pretty good at flying. Felt pretty cool. And then you go and do this external load, and you're like, okay, I have no idea what I'm doing, and this is uncomfortable and weird. But that's like fun. I think that's the fun of it, right? That's why I think people are drawn to external load, because it is so challenging. And even when you get good at it, it probably just gets more challenging, right? The stakes get higher. It's the beach one day, and then 3 years later, it's a person, and you're putting that person into a very tight situation or whatever. So I think even as your experience goes up, just the stakes get higher.
Yeah, I mean, now I'm fortunate to where I work now. I fly a line all the time. And even this last rotation, we were going to do something that I'd never done before. And you're sitting there with the Forest Service looking at you like, we're allowed to do this. And I'm like, yeah, no, we're allowed to do this and we're going to figure it out. But I've never held a Bambi bucket while you have a firefighter run up to it with a hose and do a hover fill on the end of a 100-foot line, because we're fighting fire in the middle of the desert in Nevada, which there's not a lot of water in the desert. So you get to do oddball stuff like that. And, we briefed it heavily and it went super smooth. And I was able to hold the bucket right where they needed me while, they filled it up and it went great. But a lot of it is just, on the job training and having the background to figure it out.
Yeah, it's super cool. I love that. Speaking of what you're doing now, you're at Air Shasta.
Yep.
Shout out to Casey and his wife, Keisha.
Awesome people.
But they're awesome. Done some work with them. They've really built a neat operation and a good business, both locations. And so, are you specifically with Air Shasta? How does that all work?
Yeah. So the sister company is Capital, and obviously I can't speak too much to the inner workings of the company, but it's very much run as two separate entities. On the pilot side, you see a lot of crossover between fuel truck drivers will be up here. The truck shop is actually in Redding, not Sacramento, and stuff like that. So we work a lot with the other company, but it's very separate. So I am specifically a pilot for Air Shasta in the 407. I guess technically the 206 too, but I think I've flown it 4 hours since I started, so not a lot.
Nice.
But yeah, we're flying a 407.
That's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fun to go get in every once in a while. I did a little.
Hey, don't get me wrong. I love the Long Ranger, but like, given the opportunity, I would rather be lopsided in hours, 407 over Long Ranger.
And now I'm spoiled. I'm not just flying a 407. We're flying a 407 HP or a GXI.
Oh,
so
yeah. So you're getting better. You got better performance.
Mm-hmm.
And fancier stuff. You're flying like that's a very white collar helicopter for a blue collar guy.
Yeah, the HP we have, it's very nice. Sometimes I get in it and I look at the instruments that they put in there and all the latest and greatest in technology, and I'm like, my boss must love me, because who gives me this nice of an avionics package to go stick my head out the door? Oh, and then there's an external torque gauge, so I don't have to necessarily do this number.
Yeah, you have to kick your neck. I mean, hey, look, Casey. Like I said, Casey does advocate for his team and his pilots, and he doesn't mess around. His equipment's nice. They do cool things. I was really happy to hear that you were there, because not all companies are created equally in the industry.
No.
And so it's neat for you to be able to be at a business, with owners that are proactive in maintenance and updating and always moving forward. And it's not a cheap venture for them. I know that.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And even outside of just the aircraft, the facility is nice. The group of people we work with, I don't know how the management has. I'd love to learn from the management on how they took a bunch of people and created a team where everyone gets along. I can't think of anyone that I work with that we don't get along with. It's like a big family. And to be somewhere like that where there's no squabbles, no nothing, and everyone just gets along. Sure, we flip each other, a hard time, because that's what you do with your friends, right? But even
standard
outside of the helicopters, the helicopters are immaculate. The trucks are nice. When we talked on the phone, I told you, the crew house we have is unreal. Like,
yeah, it's ridiculous. I've been meaning to call Casey about that. Be like, dude, what the heck? You're doing it. You're treating these guys too good.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing place to work, and we get to do some really fun stuff. And there's a lot of growth opportunities. And I feel like I finally found somewhere. I mean, I jumped around a lot. I'm not the first. I won't be someone to say, yeah, I didn't jump around. Or I always tell people, don't burn bridges. But like you said, not all companies are created equal. And like I did some contract work in most of my off seasons, but this year when it came to where am I going to work, I was able to, because I had a job running a snowcat, I was really, really, really picky with where I was going to go. And part of that, it's a really good time to be in aviation, there's obviously a pilot shortage, and then to be sitting here as a carded 407 guy, like you have some pull when you start talking to different companies. And I interviewed with 5 or 6, maybe 7 different companies, and I got to be really picky about where I chose to go because I was sick and tired of jumping around, moving around, not having a schedule, not having a life.
Yeah, it's definitely a pilot's market right now, which is good. And that changes, just like any market. Things are cyclical. And, right now, because of the shortage, because of the high demand, a lot of helicopter pilots jumping over to the airlines, at least for a short time. It puts a big pull on these operators. It's almost like they become more desperate, which, sometimes they're not desperate at all. And it's like near impossible. It's like someone has to die in order for you to get a job. And that's not necessarily, an ideal situation. Well, as we get to the end of this historic helicopter podcast with having you on again, I think it's great because I think you were very much a little, bushy-eyed, baby pilot a couple years ago. I remember thinking like this guy has some nuts to, contact me and get on the podcast, like, get on him, this is cool. And I'm glad I had you on. And I think it's cool now to see where you're at because we're literally like growing with you. We're seeing the progression. So if you're listening to the podcast, please make this a double header. Go and listen to Forrest's first podcast. You were in such a dingy little spot there too. I remember it was like this, I was not envious of you during that podcast. I just remember being like, man, he's in it right now. He's in it hard. I think you were maybe finishing up ag or something.
Yeah,
but,
I was in Beulah, North Dakota in a little apartment that cost me $350 a month. So, and this is 2021 that it was that cheap. It was a dump.
Yeah, it looked every bit of that. Yeah. So now looking back at it all and, knowing that forgive me if I'm wrong, but it was this was all spurred by seeing a helicopter at a ski resort operation one time. And this whole thing kind of then was like, I want to be a pilot. You did your trucking business, right? Wasn't that trucking?
Yeah. So I was running spider excavators, building ski lifts when a helicopter showed up to pour the concrete. And
that's what it was.
And then
from that moment to now, are you stoked on the decision that you made?
I am. Yes. I'm glad I did it. The hard work has finally started to pay off. I've gotten to a point now where I'm able to hold a schedule for an amazing company and have a life outside of aviation where, the last 5 years have been very much life is work.
Yep.
But I wouldn't necessarily change a thing besides, like we talked about with like tours. I would have found a way to enjoy the ride because I didn't realize how fast it was all going to go.
Yeah. It's easy to get caught up. I think we are all very capable of being unsettled in where we're at. So I don't fault you for that. So would you think that your biggest takeaway for someone that's maybe now just starting their career and starting this crazy thing in helicopters, would you say that the biggest thing is just to put your head down, grind as hard as you can, don't say no to opportunities? Caveat, don't go and work for shitty companies either. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to throw that out there, right? I think that one mindset that could get you in trouble is that if you're not going to say no to any opportunity, you might not say no to an opportunity that maybe you should say no to. There should just be a rule. You shouldn't have to pay for your job.
Exactly.
Well, we'll leave it at that. Forrest, so happy for you. So thankful that you've continued to stay in touch. You've made much more of an effort than I made, so I really appreciate that. And I want to be a better friend to you, and so I'm excited to now that you're hopefully not so immersed in trying to be a helicopter pilot. You truly are one now, and you have a better pace of life. Love to have you come hang out with Hillary and I up here in Central Oregon. Love to do some mountain biking with you. I'm just saying, like, maybe come drive snowcats at Mount Bachelor this winter.
Yeah, maybe. Or I could just come ski. I know a volunteer who might be able to give me a pass.
Yeah, I don't know. That guy's kind of a tool.
Yeah, no. But no, I know you haven't always stayed in touch, but I do appreciate last summer you reached out. We didn't really touch on it in the episode. It's okay. But last summer, there was a really difficult day in Alaska for maritime, right?
Yep, I recall now.
And you were among many people, but you were one of the first people to reach out and be like, "Hey, are you good?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good. I appreciate it." So
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I do remember that. I was scared. I knew that you had worked. I feel like maybe you had just updated me recently, like, "Hey, I got a job here," and then like that day, it's like this helicopter crash, fatal, blah blah blah. I'm like, I remember feeling very thankful. I don't think I had your phone number, so I think I hit you up on like Facebook or something, and I saw that you read the message before you responded. So I'm like,
yeah, I
okay,
was
he's
getting
alive.
a lot of them. I was the closest aircraft from the same company to the incident, and some of my really close friends luckily knew that I was in a 407, not a 206, so they kind of deduced it wasn't me based on that.
Well, that was the other thing that scared me too, because it was a 206, and I'm like, oh man, that could be him.
Yeah.
Like, yikes. What are you able to talk about that? Like, what happened with that whole incident, or would you prefer not to?
So I can talk about it a little bit. It is an ongoing investigation, so anyone is welcome to look up the NTSB, the preliminary and report came out, and to my knowledge, it was just CFIT. But it was very difficult from where I was sitting because the crew that I was flying, so for the public agency in Alaska, some of the folks that were with me in Happy Valley with the 407 shared offices with some of the individuals that were on board the aircraft. So it hit our project a lot harder than other parts of the company and other parts of the industry up there. Of course, it was sad everywhere, but to be in that position as still a newer utility guy, and I've got a room of 35 people looking at me asking what happened. And the company I was flying for, they're so overwhelmed that they gave us very little information. Basically, all they said was, "Don't talk about it, but if you could please take a moment, let your loved ones know it wasn't you, let the people working with you know." So there I am, new-ish bush pilot in Alaska, looking at a room of 30, 35 people, being like, "Hey, if you could all, this is what we know. This is kind of what we think happened, but if you could take a moment and, let your loved ones know it wasn't you, don't put anything on social media," that whole spiel, the cover your ass spiel. And then we chose as a crew to stand down, for the day. But it was definitely a learning experience.
Yeah, I think you and I talked around that time. I know that was definitely difficult for you, and definitely a weird thing to navigate, and something that you never want to have to navigate. Unfortunately, if you're listening to the podcast, there's a good chance that you may have to navigate a situation sometime where you're working for a company and there's an accident. And I would also like to point out, like, you can probably deduce the company that we're talking about. There's no problems with companies having accidents. Unfortunately, it's the nature of the helicopter business. As much as we want zero accidents, accidents will continue to happen. At least that's my stance. Maybe it's an unpopular opinion. Doesn't mean that an operator is bad or not. Sometimes it does, right? If it's a culture issue, if it's a maintenance issue, a safety issue, whatever. Yeah, there's some bad apples out there. You look at accidents like, the one in New York where they freaking tethered passengers into a helicopter, with unapproved safety belts, and then they go down the Hudson and flip over. That's stupid, right? Like, to me, like that's an operator being irresponsible. But I'm not here to call out operators or even condemn operators for accidents. I've worked for operators that have had accidents, fatals. It's just unfortunate. It's part of this business, and it's part of the responsibility that I think we all have as pilots. Like, look, we love helicopters. This podcast is all about helicopters. It's all about the joy, the amazing lives, and the amazing people, really the amazing people, reiterate that make this industry up. And I think we all owe it to each other just to always try to do a little bit better, because so much of the accidents, when you start really reading the reports, whether they're preliminary or final, or you just kind of know the story, everything's so avoidable for the most part. And things happen. Doesn't mean pilots are bad or even made bad decisions. You can do 100% right, and things change. I mean, that's just the dynamicy of the world that we're in. But Forrest, I appreciate you coming on. We've gone over time a little bit. It's been great to catch up. Please stay in touch. To our listeners, thank you. Again, go check out Forrest's original episode. I'll try to remember to put a link in this episode to that so you can kind of double up. And seriously, Forrest, more people have responded to your first episode. And in that first Rolodex, there are some pretty experienced dudes and gals within that. And you got a big response on that. And so I think people really resonated. And I think it's actually that episode. I don't know if it's because of that episode or it's just like made me realize it more because of that episode. It's like my audience is a younger helicopter audience, maybe not in age, but younger to the industry. And, I think having people on like you and then people being able to see your positive career, it's been awesome. So thanks so much for coming back on, man.
Thanks. Appreciate it.